Everyone loves a good arcade game with magic and sword fighting elements. Today, you have modern-day hits such as the Witcher series, the Dark Souls series, Conan Exiles, and so on, which are, to be fair to them, some of the best games out there. But these games are all in 3D and all with high-definition graphics. The real classic arcades are the ones in 2D with actual visible megapixels. While not so easy on the eyes, will promise you nothing but hours of entertainment. So today we are going to be looking at some of the OG classic Sword and Sorcery Arcade games from the 80s and 90s, yes, back in the days of Box TVs and no Google, that you must absolutely play and conquer before you die. However, before we go any further, I would like to ask everyone watching to like, share, and comment on the video. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. With all that said, let's get started. Golden Axe, 1989. Starting off at number 1 is one of the most popular arcade games of the late 80s. Golden Axe is a 1989 beat-em-up video game that was developed and published by Sega for arcades. The main plot has the player as one of 3 warriors who embark on the quest to free Uria, a fantasy medieval world, from the rule of a tyrannical antagonist named Death Adder. Adder captures the king of Uria and holds him and his daughter captive. The villain wields the titular Golden Axe as his weapon. The player chooses any one of the 3 protagonists, namely Gilius Thunderhead, an axe-wielding dwarf, axe battler, a broadsword-wielding barbarian, though if we are being honest, it feels more like a name for the dwarf rather than the barbarian, and finally, Tyrus Flare, the longsword-wielding Amazonian. The characters battle henchmen, skeleton warriors, and knights to eventually face off against Death Adder. Defeating Adder, though, doesn't end the game, as the final boss of the game is revealed to be Deathbringer, who is the Adder's mentor. A narrator interjection, familiar, right? Upon defeating Deathbringer, the player receives the Golden Axe and is granted immortality. The game's ending is pretty cool. It concludes with a 4th wall break, and it shows 3 kids playing Golden Axe in an empty arcade. The machine then sparks, shorts out, and bursts into flames. Suddenly, the characters from the game spill out into the real world and start chasing the kids out of the building. The 3 heroes from the game come out from the game last and rush to save the kids. Interestingly, the PC-CD version of the game significantly changes the plot of the arcade game. Each of the 3 characters has a different ending, and this version is the only version that has animated cutscenes. The game was one of the best performing arcade games in both Japan and the US markets in the late 80s. The Mega Drive or Genesis version of the game can still be found on Nintendo's Classic service. So who would be your champion to help your quest for the Golden Axe? Gauntlet, 1985. For number 2, we go back further in time to the mid-80s. Gauntlet was a hack-and-slash game that was developed by Atari in 1985. It was one of the very first multiplayer dungeon games. It was originally created as a 4-player arcade cabinet, but was later developed into a 2-player arcade cabinet. The game is a series of top-down, third-person mazes that the 4 players have to navigate while looting treasures and killing any monsters they may encounter on the way. Players unlock special items on each level that upgrade stats, unlock secret doors, or even destroy all enemies on the map. There are 4 fantasy characters that the players can choose from. They are Thor, Merlin, Thyra, or Quester. Each character corresponds to their fight classes, which are Warrior, Wizard, Valkyrie, or Elf, respectively. The class the player chooses contains various attributes and weaknesses. The enemy list includes ghosts, grunts, demons, thieves, etc. The gameplay was similar to some of the other dungeon games of its time, such as Dandy and Time Bandit. Interestingly, there was actually a dispute with the creators of Dandy regarding the concept of the game being too similar to theirs. However, the conflict was settled under the table and, allegedly, over a game machine. The game was a huge commercial and critical success, becoming one of the highest-grossing arcade games in the US, UK, and Japan. If you have 3 more Loot Goblin friends, then this is the game for all of you to enjoy over a weekend. Gauntlet II, 1986. Now, at number 3, we have the more challenging younger brother of Gauntlet. Gauntlet II was released by Atari Games as the immediate sequel to the first game. The fantasy dungeon crawler game was released a year after its predecessor and was available in both 2-player and 4-player versions. The game expands the world of the original Gauntlet. You have your 4 classes: Warrior, Wizard, Valkyrie, and Elf. But the key difference here is that the same character could be chosen by multiple people. So you could have a party of 4 Valkyries that were differentiated by color palettes. The series continues in the same vein as its predecessors, with various levels of dungeons, each with varying difficulties, and different monsters and loot. A new aspect added to the sequel was the introduction of 90-degree tilted levels. This was done to confuse the player regarding their surroundings. Another novel introduction was a new type of enemy called It. If the It touches a player, then all enemies are attracted to the player. Players could only free themselves by either touching another player or going through an exit. This added game of virtual tag made the game more complicated and thus more fun. The game was well received both commercially and critically, though not as much as the original. Did you know that some of the aspects in the game were made with the submissions coming from participants of a competition where Atari Games actually asked the fans to submit level designs and suggestions for what they would like in a potential sequel? Imagine that, a studio asking the fans what they want instead of just giving them something no one asked for. Could never happen today. Dungeons and Dragons, Tower of Doom, 1993. At number 4, we have the digital version of every geek's favorite role-playing game. Dungeons and Dragons Tower of Doom was released by Capcom in 1994 as a beat-em-up game based on the tabletop RPG for 1 to 4 players. There are 4 characters to choose from, namely Cleric, Dwarf, Elf, and Fighter. The 4 champions step up to rescue the Republic of Darukin from a number of classic Dungeons and Dragons monsters like a troll, dragon, and the final boss, Damus, who is an archlich. The heroes travel to various locations, battling monsters and collecting loot along the way until they finally reach Damus' Tower of Doom, where the final boss battle happens. The style of gameplay has been inspired by Golden Axe, while the concept of multiple paths was derived from the game Thayer's Quest. The game was extremely well received in the Japanese and US markets, becoming a foundational entry in Capcom's arcade RPG series. The game's action was praised for its intuitive and controlled nature. Do note that the game requires a basic level of understanding of how the tabletop Dungeons and Dragons works. Otherwise, you are going to be stuck on many levels using the wrong spell or the wrong attack on the wrong type of enemy. So before playing this game, do brush up on you dice throwing skills and play a game or 2 of the original Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons, Shadow over Mystara, 1996. Now, on to number 5. 3 years after the success of Tower of Doom, Capcom was back with Dungeons and Dragons Shadow over Mystara. The RPG game followed as a direct sequel to Tower of Doom, continuing the story of our 4 champions after they defeated Archlich Damus. The team realizes that Damus was actually being used by a powerful sorceress named Sin, who wants to awaken a force even more powerful than herself, known only as the Fiend. The game expanded on the aspects of the previous game, introducing names to the 4 heroes and adding Thief and Magic User as additional characters on the playable roster. The sequel also allowed up to 2 players to choose the same character with differing color palettes. The wide variety of magical and hidden items in the game, many of which the typical video gamer would not even know of, coupled with multiple endings and forking paths, keeps the game replayable even after finishing the main story. The game was very well received in Japan, becoming one of their all-time popular games at the time. It was one of the last arcade side-scrollers created by Capcom. Dungeons & Dragons Chronicles of Mystara was released as a compilation of both the D&D arcade games for Wii, PlayStation, Xbox, and Windows in 2013. So assemble the Nerd Brigade. This quest demands only the finest combatants. Rastan, 1987. Number 6 is a tale of redemption and turning a new leaf. Rastan Saga, or Rastan, was a side-scrolling hack-and-slash game made by the studio Taito back in 1987. The fantasy worlds of Conan the Barbarian inspired the game. Rastan was Taito's attempt to expand its game portfolio and tap into the action-adventure genre that was gaining popularity. You play as Rastan, a barbarian who is tasked with battling mythical creatures and traversing treacherous landscapes to save the kingdom of Siam from evil forces. The game is narrated by a future King Rastan as he tells of his exploits. There are many bosses that Rastan has to fight and defeat, such as a skeletal warrior, a wizard king, and a hydra. The big bad of the game is a large fire-breathing red dragon with magical powers enabling it to control other monsters. The game has levels containing hidden items and shortcuts, so be careful and explore everything. The game's Japanese iteration, Rastan Saga, contains an opening sequence that tells the purpose of Rastan's quest. The game was a huge success in the Japanese market, with critics praising its challenging gameplay, lush visuals, and epic soundtrack. Something interesting about the game's sequel was that it was released as Nastar in Europe and Nastar Warrior in North America, which is Rastan but backwards. You'd think this was the only video game with a barbarian protagonist that released that year, but the next game will make you think again. Barbarian, The Ultimate Warrior, 1987, continuing with the theme of barbarian warriors. Lucky Number 7 is also a game that was based on the Conan the Barbarian series. Barbarian, The Ultimate Warrior was a game developed by Palace Software in 1987 and was distributed under the name Death Sword in the United States. The game had a 2-player mode, where both players control barbarians and fight each other in a typical arcade fighter, and a single-player mode, where you play a barbarian that has to complete a set of challenges to save a princess from an evil wizard. There are 8 barbarians that the player has to defeat in a fight to the death before facing off against the evil wizard named Drax. The game has gory combat for rescuing a bikini-clad princess. It is safe to say the game was a tremendous commercial success. Some of the game's ads drew a lot of criticism from the general public, who were quite prudish at the time. In the UK, ironically really, the game got into hot water, not for its gory contents, but the fact that the game cover featured a bikini-clad Maria Whittaker, a known topless model. They rightly say there's no such thing as bad publicity because the outrage over the cover just kept boosting the game's sales. Critics were otherwise impressed with Barbarian's fast and furious combat and dashes of humor in its character interactions. Incidentally, there was another game named Barbarian, released by the UK studio Psygnosis, that was released in the same year as The Ultimate Warrior. 3 Barbarian games in 1 year. What a barbaric year 1987 was. Sword of Vermilion, arcade version, 1989. Number 8 drives us out of the Barbarian age and brings us to the future, to the medieval period. The player controls a prince attempting to save the lands of Vermilion by collecting a series of rings by navigating the overworld, dungeons, and battling against various types of enemies. Like the entry number, it has 8 rings of good and evil scattered all over the realm. The prince's father was betrayed by a fellow king. The king's faithful knight raises the prince. Upon the knight's death, the prince sets out to claim revenge and take back his throne with the help of the rings. The game has 4 different gameplay styles that change depending on the situation the player is in. They are exploring towns, navigating the overworld, battling enemies, and fighting bosses. Most of the game is in a top-down view, but the boss battles take place in a side view. There is combat with swords as well as magic spells that can be purchased from nearby non-player characters. At the time of its release, the game received a positive reception, though looking back at it, it has been criticized for being too repetitious and a lack of meshing of the various playstyles. This game, however, was one of the last Sega Mega Drive or Genesis RPGs to come with a hint book. So if you ever feel stuck when playing this game, a quick read should clear it up for you. Cadash, 1989. In at number 9, we go into the underground kingdom of Cadash to free the beautiful Princess Salasa from the clutches of the evil demonic wizard Balrog. Cadash is an arcade action role-playing game created by Taito in 1990. The arcade version of the game allows up to 4 players to play with 2 linked cabinets. The console version allows 2 players to choose from the 4 classes Fighter, Mage, Priestess, and Ninja. The game married side-scrolling platform action with the systematic aspects of RPGs, such as magic levels, potions, and attack attributes. The gameplay is comparable to games like Wonder Boy, Golden Axe, and the Rastan series. The game was critically well received in the USA and Japan, with people noting that both the arcade versions from these countries were significantly harder than any other version. So, do keep that in mind and get the original arcade version if you wish to truly make it a challenge. The original arcade version was made available for PlayStation and Nintendo Switch via the Arcade Archives series in 2023. A little fun fact, in the PC Engine version of Cadash, one of the skeletons drops this tiny 4th wall-breaking Easter egg to say when you interact with it, "Dead men tell no tales." Unless, of course, they're in a game. Cheeky from the developers. Dark Seal or Gate of Doom, 1990. Our number 10 is known by different names in different countries. Gate of Doom, also known as Dark Seal in Japan, was a hack-and-slash game developed and released in 1990 by Data East. The game uses a top-down, isometric perspective. The main aim of the game is getting through levels while facing off against mystical enemies, picking up loot, and avoiding any traps along the way. The game allowed for 2-player co-op. This game, too, had 4 different characters to choose from: Carl the Knight, Freya the Wizard, Rigger the Bard, and Kirikazi the Ninja. The plot basically follows that a Black Knight has stolen the relics required to seal the Gate of Doom, and as one of the 4 fabled heroes, you have the task of closing the gate before evil seeps through to destroy the world. The bosses on each level are different types of dragons. The game also had a sequel, which was called Dark Seal 2 in Japan and Wizard Fire in the US. While critically praised when they were released, the game was criticized for being pretty repetitive and derivative in its gameplay from a modern perspective. A funny quirk of this game was that the characters like to announce themselves when you select them, you see, or when they cast a magic spell. While this is funny at first, the gag does run thin after an hour or so be prepared to play the game on mute with subtitles on. Knights of the Round, 1991. Number 11 takes place in medieval England. Knights of the Round was a beat-em-up RPG developed by Capcom, which had a 3-player co-op available with linked cabinets. The game follows the exploits of Arthur, who pulls the mythical sword Excalibur out of a rock and sets off on a quest to fulfill his destiny, defeat the evil king Garibaldi, and unite all of Britain under his rule. He is joined by his close compatriots, the traveling swordsman Lancelot, and the strong but gentle warrior Percival. The game has RPG elements to it in terms of gaining better weapons as the game progresses. However, there are no choices regarding what is to be upgraded in the character. Knights of the Round is similar in gameplay aspects to the King of Dragons, which was released earlier in the same year by Capcom. The game did pretty well with the Japanese and North American markets, and was praised by critics as well. So, if you believe clashing with knights and ruling the Britons is your calling, this is the game that will help you attain that calling. Just make sure you have your Lancelot and Percival to join your quest as well.
Willow.
Willow, 1989. At number 12, we have a game that was released based on the film Willow, starring Warwick Davis. Capcom actually published 2 different games in 1989, one as a side-scrolling arcade platform game, and the console version as an action RPG. The console version was only loosely based on the film, and was completely unrelated to the arcade version. The game, on the other hand, has a similar plot to the movie. An evil queen, Bavmorda, is after the life of an infant girl. The wizard Willow Ufgood is tasked with protecting the baby Alora from the villainess. Willow is helped in his mission by Medmardigan, a warrior. The game has 6 stages, some where you play as Willow, some where you play as Medmardigan, and some where you can choose from either character. The game received critical success since its release in arcades. Despite the original movie not doing well commercially, the game's graphics at the time being the subject of praise. Willow had tons of backtracking once you obtained new items, and also required some grinding to overcome the harder boss fights, which makes Willow a great purchase on your quest to conquer all the legendary Sword and Sorcery arcade games of times forgotten. Magic Sword, 1990. Moving on to number 13 is a Capcom classic, but it has a big choice at the end. Magic Sword, Heroic Fantasy, or simply Magic Sword, was a 1990 hack-and-slash game developed by Capcom. The side-scrolling game has you play as Alan the Brave as he scales to the top of a 50-floor tower known as the Dragon's Keep, which houses a powerful dark sorcerer known as Lord Drakmar. Drakmar was bedazzled by the allure of the evil crystal known as the Black Orb, and wanted to take over the world. The player has to fight an army of ghouls and demons from hell raised by Drakmar on the way up the tower. Upon defeating the evil sorcerer, the player is faced with a big decision to make. Destroy the Black Orb, or take control of it and become the new Dark Lord. Magic Sword had a multiplayer option, letting the second player control Belger the Brave, a big brutish thug. The game has mostly been well received by critics, though some have criticized the story as a tad unoriginal. The choice before you seems simple enough. What would you choose? Destroy the evil, or give in to its power and become the evil itself? King of Dragons, 1991. At penultimate number 14, we have a game that is similar to Knights of the Round, albeit with the villain being a dragon. King of Dragons was a Capcom beat-em-up RPG that was released a little before Knights of the Round in 1991. There are 5 playable characters that can be chosen. They are the dwarf, the cleric, the fighter, the wizard, and the elf. The story follows the big boss, a red dragon known as Gildas, who lays waste to the land of Malus for a century. Gildas is put under a spell that makes him slumber for a year. As the year approaches its end, the protagonists of the game set out to kill the dragon. They face off against dragon knights, dark wizards, orcs, and many such monsters on their quest to slay the dragon. Each fighter has certain unique attributes that need to be upgraded as players progress. The game is 16 levels, but some of them are short, so it is not a game that takes up too much time. Critics praise the game for its addictiveness and action. It was recently listed as one of the best beat-em-up games of all time. So, gather your team. There is no time to lose. We have a dragon to slay. Ghosts and Goblins, 1985. And finally, at long last, we have number 15. Ghosts and Goblins was a platform arcade developed by Capcom and was the first game in the Ghosts and Goblins franchise. The game is also known as Makaimura in Japan. The main protagonist is a knight named Sir Arthur, who is on a quest to rescue Princess Prin Prin, who is kidnapped by the evil sorcerer Azeroth, king of Demon World. The player faces zombies, demons, dragons, and other monsters while battling his way through a graveyard, Camelot, the Great Abyss, and beyond. The game is often considered to be one of the most difficult games by arcade standards, having certain points where the player will suffer instant death even with their armor, and having to finish the level in 3 minutes or lose a life. The arcade game was a major hit both with the critics and in the US and Japan markets, launching a franchise in its wake. The Ghosts and Goblins series has altogether sold over 4.6 million units, and stands as one of the best-selling Capcom game franchises. So if you want a wide variety of monsters to cut down and Mario isn't doing it for you, this is the game for you. Marvelous verdict. And with that, our long list of legendary sword and sorcery games you should definitely play is complete. What are your thoughts on the list? How long do you think it would take you to finish all of them? Do you have a favorite? Do you think we missed out on a game? Comment down below. As always, please like, share, and comment on the video. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be the first to be notified of all things Marvelous videos. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.